Alright, this is my last trip of 2017, and time-wise it may have been the shortest. September 13th, I flew into Dulles and took a Uber ride over to Harper's Ferry. Got on the trail around 2 o'clock. I had just been on the road with my wife in the RV for 3 weeks out to Glacier National Park. And to tell you the truth, I was out of shape. I didn't realize it, but I was. I hadn't done any hiking for 3 weeks, and I was 10 pounds overweight. And I thought this trip would be a piece of cake. September in Virginia, and should be beautiful weather. Well, it was 70s and it was humid, and I did not enjoy hardly any of it, to tell you the truth. Just hiking through Harper's Ferry, and then that initial hill southbound from the river up into the hills just about did me in. I did 9 miles that day over to David Lesser's shelter, and all I remember is a real long downhill to the spring. I got enough so I wouldn't have to do it the next morning, enough water. The next day I did 14 miles, past the 1,000-mile marker for the northbounders. Started the roller coaster. Man, that to me was a joke. The sign there telling you who it was built by and maintained by. To me it was just hilarious. I think it was just 80 years of neglect. Shows what happens when there's never any effort to divert the water off the trail. It just washes away anything except rocks, and that's all you've got left behind. They may have cut down some blowdowns here and there, but to me it just looked like neglect. Stayed at the Sam Moore shelter. Most notable thing there was a lot of deer, probably 6 or 8 deer drinking out of the spring nearby. Met a young man, his college age. I guess he just graduated. He had a few months to kill before he was going into the Air Force to be a pilot. Anyway, his goal was to section hike Virginia. He had a month to do it. The next day I made it to Dick's Dome Shelters, 15 miles. Past 10 or 15 people on the trail. Somewhere along the way, I'm not sure it was this day or the next, there was a small shelter and it had a shower. It was solar powered, had a nearby stream. I guess the solar powered a pump water over to a tank above the structure. It looked like a privy. You open the door and there's a shower instead. So I took a shower, and that kept me cool for about 15 minutes. I was soaking wet with sweat again because it was so darn humid. But anyway, that's the first and only time in 1,100 miles so far of the trail that I've seen a solar-powered shower, or any shower as far as that goes. There at Dick's Dome Shelter, when I got there was that young man. He was at this little structure. It almost looked like one of those geospheres or a yurt or something. It was funny, a little shelter. And he had spread his stuff out everywhere. It didn't even look like there was going to be room for 2 of us. And so I'm kind of looking around way up the hill from the opposite side that you enter the shelter area from, or the trail from. There's a brand new structure. Probably held 10 or 12 folks. Anyways, brand new shelter. So I sat up there. The wood smelled nice and fresh, like it just came from the lumber yard. So I had that whole shelter to myself that night. A young couple showed up later, but they obviously wanted to be alone. They pitched a tent down by the creek. There's not too much else noteworthy about that shelter, other than the fact there was 2 of them there. The next day I did 18 miles to Tom Floyd Wayside, and it was a miserable climb down to this little tiny water source called Ginger Spring. If you were going southbound, the thing to do would take the Blue Trail over to the spring and get your water and climb up from there, rather than having to climb up twice. It was also unusual there that I saw a young woman with probably a 5 or 6 year old daughter. They were camping. They were gone in the morning when I got up. But anyway, I thought that was unusual. Large slope area and rocky, not much of the way of tent sites, if you ask me. Right around sunset, a young man shows up. He's a SOBO, trying to make it southbound to Springer by sometime between Thanksgiving and Christmas. He tried to convince me that these yellow mushrooms growing on this tree stump were edible, but I noticed he wasn't going to eat them. But he was sure making an effort to try to get me to sample them. The next day, it probably was not more than 6 miles, maybe 10, I'm not sure. I just barely got into Shenandoah National Park. I had no luck hitching a ride there at Front Royal, where the trail crosses the road into town. People would be crazy if they tried to stop and pick you up. You could have walked down a little ways and got off on like a dirt pull-off, but if they saw you down there, it'd be too late for them to stop. They'd be way by you. So anyway, I went on, and that's when I started to realize that I'm not going to have a whole bunch of luck getting supplies in the park, because the real waysides, the businesses that have any type of resupply are already closed for the season. I think I missed the last one by a couple of days. So between that and being out of shape and just suffering in the humidity, I decided to call it quits, and I spent a good little while trying to hitch a ride back to Front Royal, and this young guy stopped and picked me up, and I don't know if he was pulling my leg or what. If he was pulling my leg, he sure was convincing. He was from India, and his name was Raj, and he was studying astrophysics at the University of Virginia. Sound familiar? Raj, astrophysicist. Sounds a lot like Raj on Big Bang Theory, right? Anyway, this guy apparently supposedly he was out camping because he was trying to figure out what to do with his love life. He had a love interest. She had gotten a job after she got her master's or something and moved to the New York area, and he was trying to figure out what to do with this long distance relationship, and I guess he thought I looked like a good sounding board, being an old guy. Maybe I had some words of wisdom to lay on him. Anyway, he said he'd give me a ride to the northern park entrance for the Shenandoahs, and by the time we got there, he was really into this counseling session we were having, and he volunteered to take me into town, Front Royal. So that's what we did. And we got into town. He said, well, there's a pancake house. You want to have breakfast together? And I said, well, okay. So we continued talking about his love life, how he should handle this over breakfast, over pancakes, some eggs and bacon, a little bit of everything. Finally, he even volunteered to take me to my motel, where I was going to arrange for an Uber ride the next day into D.C. and a flight home. So anyway, that was kind of bizarre. He was a nice guy. I have no reason to doubt anything he said, but I just thought it was kind of odd. Raj, astrophysicist from India. But anyway, the next day I got a ride into D.C., learned a lesson about arriving at the airport too early. I was just wanting to get there. I thought I could hang around the airport, so I had gone to the hardware store and got some contractor trash bags and bungee cords, bound up my backpack and trekking poles. And when I got to southwest corner, the counter, they said, well, you know, it's 5.5 hours to your flight. We can't check any baggage till 4 hours prior to boarding. So it's really awkward to carry that 25-pound blob of plastic bag around the airport. You can't get past security at that point. So anyway, now I know, don't try to get to the airport too darn soon. Anyway, that's probably the least eventful trip I had, 2017. I should add that I did a total of 200 miles in 2017.